All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice, this time for the single game showdown slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. Monday Night Football Week 7. It is the San Francisco 49ers and the Minnesota Vikings. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. And in these videos, normally we talk about the injuries that impact the slate, low risk, high risk lineup construction tips, some player takes, angles for the largest contest on both FanDuel and DraftKings, and some general showdown strategies. This is a live Q&A, so as you watch this video, I'll be here for 30 minutes or so, to about 6:30 maybe. And if you have questions along the way, throw them in the chat box, and I will interrupt my normal schedule and answer those questions periodically. So we got Bronco, Patrick, Samuel, Sant in the chat. What's up, everyone? Thank you for tuning in, as always. Uh, Interesting game tonight. San Francisco 7-point road favorites up in Minnesota. Total has moved up, ticked up a bit to about 44. Some injuries certainly that impact the slate, especially on San Francisco side, and that's where we'll start. So the biggest, obviously, is the question mark on Christian McCaffrey. Adam Schefter reported yesterday that CMC will suit up and play tonight. Has a slight oblique tear. That is the official terminology that the team is using. Any muscle injury is going to be grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. It sounds like it is grade 1, not that serious. Some Twitter doctors feel that there is a potential for furthering that injury based on where it is and how deeply torn it is. But he's going to play. He's going to suit up. McCaffrey's a tough dude. The biggest question is, do they limit his reps at all? You would think so, but seemingly in every other spot, Shanahan just runs CMC into the ground. So I think we have to just assume his full workload. If he is limited in any capacity, if this game becomes a blowout early, maybe they take him out one drive earlier than expected or one drive earlier than they normally do. They still have two backups, Jordan Mason, Elijah Mitchell. Let's scroll down and find them. So around the same price. If you've watched these videos before, you know that we've discussed this new phenomenon that DraftKings and FanDuel are doing this season, where they're pricing up the backups if the starter has any potential injury whatsoever, because they just do not want any completely mispriced backup being a starter. So while Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell with a healthy CMC should be 2K, $1,500, I don't know, super cheap. Instead, they're both at $5,600 and $5,800 respectively. Really, the only way you can play these guys if you believe one gets more work than the other, and CMC is completely limited, re-injured, because at that price tag, it is going to be extremely tough, even with the garbage time, 40 yards, 50 yards, and a touchdown at 10 points. It's going to be really tough for these guys to hit the optimal lineup. But again, they're both going to be less than 10% owned, so just something to think about here. Now we also have Deebo Samuel. He's officially out. Has been ruled out for 2 games with his shoulder injury. And let's take a look here. So Deebo went out early in that Cleveland game. He's out tonight. So trying to get a sense of what they would do here without Deebo Samuel. If you remember earlier in the season, there was a showdown slate. Brandon Ayuk missed it on a short week. Ronnie Bell was the chalk at $200. Obviously scored a touchdown, right? But it's a little bit different with Deebo and how they plan to fill that void. In the past, if you look at last year, there were 4 games that Deebo missed last year. One was another game where Juwan Jennings missed. So if you throw that out, there are 3 games where both Deebo was out, but Juwan Jennings was in. In those games, Juwan Jennings averaged 85% plus of the snaps. He slid into that number 2 wide receiver role. Not necessarily the volume or the type of role that Deebo would have. They certainly changed their offense when Deebo is out. But Juwan Jennings was on the field a ton, 4 or 5 targets per game, which at his price tag, at 4K, is pretty nice. 4 or 5 targets, guaranteed playing time, certainly can do worse. In also those games, Ray McCloud filled in as the wide receiver 3, saw 35 to 45% of the snaps. Nice thing about McCloud, when he's on the field, while it's definitely less than Juwan Jennings, he is getting design looks and targets, screens, end rounds, pop passes, things of that nature. So Ray McCloud at $2,200, not a ton of volume, but in smaller contests or if he lucks into a touchdown, is a guy that can save a lot of salary. He'll be relatively popular. There's another guy here that's in his range that's going to be even more popular. But Ray McCloud as the wide receiver 3 certainly will see some touches and is underpriced for his new role with Deebo out. Ronnie Bell, the aforementioned Ronnie Bell, 1K, wide receiver 4. Maybe they fill in him a little more this season. He obviously is a rookie, wasn't there last year. Maybe they like what they see and he gets a few more snaps than the wide receiver 4 did last year. So in the highest risk, the largest field contest, Ronnie Bell is certainly an option as well. But those other two guys, Jennings and McLeod, that certainly see the biggest boost. All right, let's see here. Let's answer some of these questions before we get to the next injuries. Actually, one more injury on San Francisco to talk about. Starting left tackle Trent Williams is out. Obviously, one of the best tackles in the game. That certainly hurts the San Francisco offense. Not sure the Minnesota pass rush is built to take advantage of that, especially when one of their edge rushers, Marcus Davenport, was placed on injured reserve this week, hurt his ankle last week. So they're down. But reading about how they expect to fill the Trent Williams void, they have a guy that they like that's going to fill in, but could mean more blocking snaps for George Kittle. Kittle has talked about his blocking role recently, but that's something we have to balance tonight. If Kittle isn't running as many routes tonight, but when he does run routes, he's more likely to be targeted because Debo is off the field. It's an interesting dilemma to think about. So Kittle at 7,200. Let's just throw this out there. It was National Tight End Day yesterday. Kittle has been known to explode on National Tight End Day and in primetime specifically. I would not be shocked for Kittle, as we saw in the last primetime game he played where he scored 3 times on just 3 catches. Certainly can happen. It's a delicate balance. Kittle is not going to see reduced ownership because of the Trent Williams injury. He'll see elevated ownership because Debo is out. So I think if you have to take a stand, you probably go under and just cross your fingers that it's not a vintage primetime Kittle performance. Because there's no doubt that when he's running routes, he's going to be the number 2 option behind Brandon Ayuk. All right, let's see. Patrick says, love to hear feelings on Ray being a direct back. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, so we talked about that. That's good. Samuel says, do you recommend having the same captains as MVPs regardless of each site's scoring systems? Thanks. No, definitely not. That's a good question between FanDuel and DraftKings. So DraftKings obviously has the PPR scoring, but more importantly, it has a salary multiplier. So on DraftKings, a cheaper guy can be the optimal captain and not necessarily be the highest scorer. When you're on FanDuel, whoever you pick at MVP has to be the slate's highest score in order for you to win the largest GPP on that site. So you can't pick a cheaper guy unless you truly believe that they can score the most points on the slate. We've seen it happen. There was a kicker MVP just as recently as a couple of slates ago. But in general, you're going to play quarterbacks in the target hogs and the high volume running backs at MVP on FanDuel, whereas you might play wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s, cheap guys on DraftKings. So it's certainly a different player pool. But thanks for that question, Samuel. EGS Comics. Hey, Brian, what is your thoughts on playing San Francisco defense tonight? Defense spelled with a C, so I know you're there from the UK or Canada. So shout out to to tuning in from a different country. Thank you, EGS. So pricing is interesting. I would have expected San Francisco's defense to be 10K on FanDuel. They're not. They're cheaper. They will be more popular as a result. If you go over to DraftKings, 49ers defense, 5K, relatively pricey. But again, not as pricey as we've seen some 5,400s, some 5,800s this year, in fact. So a little bit underpriced. They'll be popular. I expect them to exceed the 20% mark. Obviously, they're in a great spot. Great defense. Kirk Cousins, big potential, 7-point favorites, big potential for scoring. And they have a chance to outscore, obviously, the San Francisco running backs here. But they could outscore Osborne Madison in a big game, in a blowout. So I like San Francisco's defense as an option to save salary, to leave salary on the table to differentiate. And, it's certainly a spot where they can succeed. So just build your lineups accordingly. Chris says, taking this show as proof of life, how are you handling the value talk with Powell and to a lesser degree, Ray? All right, good question. So what's up, Chris? So we talked about Ray. We expect him to be 20 to 25% owned, depending on the contest. Brandon Powell is the other guy that I alluded to earlier that we expect to be upwards of 40% in some contests, definitely more in smaller contests. So Brandon Powell, $2,800, 10 targets in the last 2 games since Justin Jefferson went down. Remember, Justin Jefferson was actually playing in that Chicago game, left that game early. So 4 of those targets came after Jefferson left versus the Bears. The other 6 came all last week. 6 came after Jefferson left versus the Chiefs, 4 last week. And the thing about Powell, we'll probably see 3+ targets. He will likely see more volume than Ray McLeod. And then like some other guys who were not sure about their playing time, like Jeff Wilson's a great example last night. $200. Everyone expected him to be the running back too. just wasn't for whatever reason. So the volume wasn't guaranteed. Now Powell can go out there and not get targets, but when he's out there, they're using him on screens, using him on these short average depth of target routes. So his points are pretty guaranteed for a guy who's $2,800, and his ownership reflects that. Like playing both of these guys, and I think Bismo pointed it out in our daily plug. Bismo is one of our Showdown writers, said that he believes if you're playing small field GPP, so think less than 500 players, just play one of McLeod or Powell in all of your lineups, lock in that value, allow you to pay up for multiple studs. And I have to agree with that in these smaller contests. The larger GPPs, it gets interesting because we do have some guys. We talked about Ronnie Bell, Cam Akers maybe, right? Let's get these guys out of here and just look at the full picture. Juszczyk can obviously catch passes, get some goal line design looks. Maybe a $200 guy like Josh Oliver outscores them. But I think they're worth the price. And in low risk contests, which we'll talk about here in a second, you can actually play both these guys on DraftKings to really fit in what you're trying to do for low risk. Samuel says, I've listened to a suggestion of playing McLeod and pairing it with the 49ers defense. Due to McLeod being their punt, kick return, do you see any feasible advantage? Yeah, I mean, certainly we would love that to happen. Punt, kick return touchdowns are extremely rare. And, I mean, if you're breaking a tie, sure, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to try to accomplish that less than 1% feat. So I understand the allure. You get 12 points for the kick return instead of 6 if you play both guys, both players. But it's really something that just doesn't happen that often. Totally not the FBI. Ed, what's up, man? It says, oh, snap. Brian Live. Let's talk locking Captain Kirk MVP on FanDuel. 6%. I'm going to throw for 303 to 3 different wide receivers. So that's a great point, right? We have both CMC and Brock Purdy scheduled to take up close to 70% of the total MVP ownership by the field over on FanDuel. And we can play a quarterback at 6%. And generally when we get 6% quarterbacks, it's like Josh Dobbs. Oh my God, it's Tyrod Taylor. God damn it, it's Zach Wilson. We get a legit quarterback, Kirk Cousins, in a legit offense with legit pass catchers at 6% projected ownership on MVP, and a variety of guys to pair him with. Addison, Osborne, Powell, Hawkinson. If you want to go super cheap, super low owned, Josh Oliver, guys like that. So I really like that call, Ed. I think the high risk strategy for sure on FanDuel tonight for the largest contest is to fade both CMC and Purdy at MVP. Mix it up amongst those low-owned guys. Pray that they can outscore CMC and Purdy. And there are reasons to believe that they can. CMC could be limited with his injury. Purdy could struggle with Trent Williams out. Possibilities. Not necessarily likelihoods, but possibilities. Worth taking shots at those guys at MVP. Sean says, Vikings are pretty stout on run D. CMC is banged up. Fading San Francisco running backs to the degenerate. I don't think so. I mean, we always have the fade CMC club in Showdown. Cookies and juice are provided, and that's about the only thing we can afford after the meeting is over and the game ends. But I think especially tonight it makes even more sense. So yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea whatsoever, especially when CMC is still seeing pretty typical CMC ownership. Maybe slightly depressed compared to some previous slates, but still shockingly high. Ed says Vikings running backs won't rush for more than 60 yards total. I mean, that's probably true. Speaking of which, Addison, let's go up here. Where is he? Yeah, Madison. Alexander Madison. Like really outsnapped Cam Akers last week. 2 weeks ago, it was closer to 60-40. Last week, it was 45-9 total snaps, which was interesting to me. Long week. Yeah, if he sees that sort of a workload, then Madison is certainly in play at 6,600. Hasn't been the most efficient running back, but they're using him in the screen game, using him near the goal line. And if he plays 80% of the snaps, that's a pretty big difference. And that's that question, or that response stems seamlessly into Stant's question. Do you think Akers will be worth a spot in one of my lineups? Yeah, it's up and down, like you say. But we do know he will be super low owned. He is a guy that if you're not playing McLeod, if you're not playing Brandon Powell, that could really do some damage. If those guys fail and Akers falls into the end zone, that's a larger contest only play. I wouldn't be playing Cam Akers in smaller contests, but for the largest GPPs, sure, it's in play. All right, let's talk about low risk now. And I see some more questions here, and we will get to them. So thanks for keep throwing those questions in. The more questions you have, the less I have to come up with stuff on my own. So we appreciate that. Let's talk about low risk really quickly. 50-50s, double ups, head to heads. These are contests where you just have to beat half the field to double your money. You know the drill. If you've been watching these videos, if you read our showdown guide, you know the drill. When you play low risk contests in showdown, generally you want to try to lock up all the scoring, playing both quarterbacks, playing both running backs if it's not a split backfield, playing any obvious values. And we can do that pretty clearly, right? So let's put Purdy at captain, right? The favorite quarterback. CMC, still CMC, low risk, we're going to play him. Outrageous ownership, great roll. Madison, $6,600 starting running back. We'll take that. Now, if you play both guys, both Powell and McLeod, 11K left per player, you can play Ayuk or you can play Cousins. Now, I think typical projections will favor Ayuk here, and rightfully so. He is one of our underperforming wide receivers this week. His teammate is out. That is the perfect storm of opportunity that we generally look for. I'll be playing Ayuk heavily tonight in most contests. Can you play him over a quarterback in low risk? That's an interesting question. Very, very interesting. I think we have to go with the data here, the historical value, and play Cousins at quarterback over Ayuk. If you want to play Ayuk over Cousins, you don't expect Cousins in Minnesota to keep up. I understand. But that is the play to get our preferred showdown approach in. You can play Ayuk a ton in high-risk contests. And if he goes off, you make money there. Now, FanDuel, it's a different story. You can't play these guys easily or at all. McCaffrey, Purdy, Cousins, Madison, negative $500 left for the last lineup spot. You can fade Madison. Maybe you fade Cousins. You go 49ers onslaught here. You play 9K 49ers defense. Jake Moody, just 8,500 here. You could play those guys. That's probably the more preferred approach for low-risk contests on FanDuel. I wouldn't be playing low-risk on FanDuel tonight. I would limit my low-risk allocation to just DraftKings only. All right, lots more questions. Let's get these in. Wayne says, if you could only do one lineup for this showdown, what type of lineup would you do? 3-3, 4-2? Yeah, I don't really necessarily look at it that way. I understand I do talk about that a lot on these shows. More importantly, I'm looking at, if I'm making one lineup, depending on the contest, who's the low-owned guy I want to get in? What's the game story I want to tell? What's the angle I want to have? Who's the captain I want to build around? These are the ideas I have first and foremost. And then as I build that lineup, then I'll look more towards how many players per team. And if it's looking like a chalkier lineup, I don't really like many of the low-owned guys, then I'll start to build in the opposite direction of the field building with the rest of my lineup as far as number of players per team. Tonight is actually pretty balanced considering the fact it is a 7-point spread and the 49ers are on the slate. Decent amount of the field lineups will be 3-3. 4-2 maybe in one direction, even some Minnesota 4-2s. So if you build 5-1 San Francisco, 4-5 Minnesota guys, that is a way to get different if your lineup is super chalky. But I think it's probably a secondary idea tonight in terms of players per team. Anthony says, who's your favorite captain? That's a great question. I haven't fully fleshed it out yet. I'm still working on my lineups. Favorite captain, Ayuk has to be one up there with his underperforming wide receiver status. Kirk Cousins, the MVP on FanDuel, we just talked about. I like that idea a lot. Shout out to Ed for that idea. Favorite captain is either going to be Ayuk or, let's go over to DraftKings. Ayuk or Jordan Addison for me. Their stud rookie receiver. Should see decent captain ownership because of his price. Number one wide receiver at $7,600. But my favorite option of the group on the Minnesota side. Amateur Hour, what's up, man? It says, yo, Dominic, Kittle touchdown, Niners money line. Also have Ayuk over 4.5 receptions. Purdy 28.5 attempts. So Dominic just believes that 49ers are going to hold the ball the entire game. Very possible in prime time. Good luck to you, Dominic. Eagles, thanks for the show. Appreciate you. And Mr. Torian says, thoughts on the majority Viking stack? Yeah, so that kind of bleeds in from the previous segment here talking about players per team. It's interesting because you can go something like, let's just say volume funnels through Ayuk. Kittle stays in to block more. CMC is limited. 49ers defense doesn't do much. And then Vikings offense actually stays on schedule and does well. You can play like, I'm just throwing something together here. Hawk, Addison, Powell, Ayuk, something like this, right? Where like you wouldn't necessarily think in this type of game environment that 4 Vikings would make sense, but it could make sense in this particular setup. So I think it's a decent idea, Mr. Torium. Amateur Hour, what's the read on Minnesota man D rate? No Ayuk flourishes in man. Debo out obviously better. I personally don't look at defensive schemes too much just because teams do switch it up from week to week on the most part. I'm playing Ayuk because Debo's out and he's an underperforming wide receiver. I'm just going to play him heavily, regardless of whether they're playing zone or man. Kevin says, is it my eyes or is your screen blurry? Check your, go to the settings and check the rate. Sometimes it just defaults to like 460 or 480. Make sure you can change it to 1080 or 4K. And San says he looks fine to me. Thank you, San. Appreciate you. Jose says, is fading both quarterbacks viable? I don't think so on this slate. It would have to be a super low-scoring game. 49ers just harass Cousins. Purdy, terrible game last week. Tough game environment. Obviously, tough defense in Cleveland. Missing his left tackle now. Could happen. We'll see. Minnesota blitzes a lot, and they have just absolutely diced up teams that blitz a lot. And knowing Brian Flores is going to continue to blitz, and a good chance they continue to dice them up. But if Purdy does struggle because Trent Williams is out, regresses a little bit, I can see it. Play for a low-scoring game with at least one defense if you do think that you're going to play a zero quarterback lineup. AJ says, what's your take on defense? So, yeah, that's the thing. So obviously San Francisco is going to be pretty popular at 5K as a favorite. No one in their mind is going to play the Vikings at 3,400. We saw it just as recently as last night. Dolphins scored as a cheap defense. Cheap defenses are great. We saw the Jaguars on Thursday score as a cheap defense. Cheap defenses work really well when there aren't a ton of values. People, the field, when there aren't that many values, they still don't play the underdog defense, and they instead just load up on kickers and the favorite defense. Even more so, the Vikings are going to be like 5% owned because we have Powell and McLeod right underneath them. Now, they're not as strong because those guys are present. But if they luck into a defensive touchdown at 5%, that's a huge leap over the Powell and McLeod lineups. So, probably larger field only. I don't know if I have the stones to play Vikings defense in smaller GPPs. Definitely not low risk. I just don't think there's a need tonight because even if they do luck into 10, 12 points, you're not gaining that much over guys who play Powell and McLeod in smaller GPPs. Yes, those individual points matter in the largest contest where you have to be optimal, not necessarily in smaller contests. So you're not really gaining that much by pivoting to the Vikings defense. 49ers will be popular, rightfully so, and I think they are an option in smaller contests. Qualkheis, what's up, man? One of our longtime subscribers has become a member of YouTube here. We do have the YouTube membership program to show support, get you Discord access, so thank you, Qualkheis. Has been hitting some prize picks or underdog plays in our Discord, so shout out to Qualkheis for staying hot. All right. Nigel says, are you playing both tight ends together on FanDuel? No, I would probably pick one. Very rarely do we see double tight end lineups win on FanDuel due to the half-point PPR scoring. Yes, we do have two studs here, but Hawkinson at 12K, Kittle 10K, somewhat affordable. I don't find myself at least going out of my way to play both. If I'm building 150 and they end up in a lineup or two together, sure, I'll keep it. But I'm not going to hand build two tight end lineups on purpose. Nick says, give this man a like. He's great. So thank you for the prompt, Nick. If you like what you're seeing, make sure you give us a thumbs up. And something like half our viewers are not subscribed, that's fine. You're just popping in, checking it out. But if you like what you see, make sure you are subscribed to the channel because we go live or upload a showdown video every Monday and Thursday. We do a live Q&A on Saturdays for the NFL main slate. Our NFL manager, Chris, does a video on Friday nights for the main slate. And if you're an NBA fan, if you play NBA DFS, you definitely want to subscribe because our entire team, we have a team of 5 guys. They're actually going live every single day for the NBA season, a few hours before lock, to break down the news, give their best plays, answer your questions here on YouTube. So subscribing is the best way to know when they're going to do that each day. So just click that subscribe button below. It's free. Let's see here. More man or zone coverage questions. I personally ignore those. I don't find much value in them. I know a lot of people, there's a lot of analysis out there, but it's noisy at best, I will say, as far as predictability. Shout out to Qualkheis, man. This guy used to do this during the COVID season all the time. gifted 10 Occupy Fantasy memberships, and you'll see it in the chat now. So there's going to be 10 different viewers who do not have a YouTube membership. It's $4 a month. Get access to some emojis during the live streams, but more importantly, you get Discord access. He just gifted 10 of them. Qualkai's got another promotion. Qualkai's, thank you for that. And for those 10, make sure you check the chat box here as you're watching. If you're just watching this now, check the chat box to see if your name was there. You'll get the monthly YouTube membership from Qualkai. So thank you, Qualkai's. You are the man, as King B says. Another promotion. Shout out to Qualkai's. Michael Mikau? How do I say your name? Let me know. I don't want to get it wrong. Mr. Lipford. Best single entry advice for FanDuel. Yeah. So single entry, we're assuming the larger single entries, right? You have to beat a lot of people with only one entry. Yes, they only have one entry as well, but you still have to beat them. I like the idea of our showdown writer Bismo, put in the plug. If you're playing single entry, you're playing larger contests, fading Purdy or CMC at MVP. I like the Cousins idea that Ed put in the chat earlier, but one of Ayuk, Cousins, maybe Kittle, maybe Jordan Addison, more likely Cousins, pivoting and hoping that they're the optimal MVP over, or that game script is the optimal over a CMC or Purdy, because there's too much competition with just one lineup if those guys are optimal. And then says, damn, you forgot me. For the record, he did not pick who it was. I think YouTube just randomly gives the memberships. So if you didn't win the luck of the draw, sorry for that. Jayhawk, our NBA writer, NBA manager, our NBA analyst was gifted one. So we'll see if we can get that out. So, all right. Let's finish out the show with high risk. So we talked about different team types. I think we talked about a good amount of captain ideas. Any other low-owned plays to think about? Let's go to DraftKings. All right, let's see here. So going from the top down, we talked about the San Francisco running backs, really large field only. Osborne is going to be popular, 6,400, because there is kind of a drop-off here, a dead zone. So if you end up with a lineup that has, 58 to 65, 58 to 68 left, people are going to play Madison or Osborne. And Osborne, as a receiver, likely gets more level on DraftKings. He'll be pretty popular, so not really a low-owned guy by any means. Jake Moody, $5,400. We've been seeing this trend on DraftKings of them just, fuck it, let's make these kickers expensive. And Moody is $5,400. We've seen these. Aubrey was $5,200, and Groupie for New Orleans was $5,200 or $5K or something. And as a result, they end up being under 20% owned in good spots. Generally, kickers over the past 18 months have been really useful in showdown contests. And when we get kickers under 20%, even better. And even more better, even betterer, we don't have anybody above them, 58, 56. Mitchell and Mason likely not to factor into this game or into the showdown results. Moody, all he has to do is outscore the defense. He's been great so far this year, averaging nearly 10 fantasy points per game, under 20%. You got to love that. Kion, if I said your name wrong, I apologize. Let me know how to say your name. Kion or Kion, let me know. Who do you think will have lower ownership on FanDuel, Powell or Osborne? Let's take a look. Let's go to our Occupy model. OccupyFantasy.com ranks every player of FanDuel and DraftKings with our projected ownership. Sorting by FanDuel Flex ownership, we have Osborne at 32%, and we have Powell at 9%. So yes, Powell extremely popular on DraftKings, where salary savings is important with the extra roster spot, the PPR scoring, the lower salary floor. Not the case on FanDuel. Yes, he'll be used. We only project him to be in around 10% of lineups, where we project nearly 30% for Osborne at 9,500. So Osborne considerably much higher owned. All right, we got another question. For FanDuel, do you think the optimal lineup would be 3-2 Viking heavy lineup with a Niner captain? These are interesting. Another way to get different is to play more Vikings in flex. Yes, absolutely, especially if it's Ayuk. CMC. Because if CMC hogs everything, as he is known to do, that doesn't leave much else for 49ers guys in a competitive game. If it's a blowout, yes, it's going to be 4-1 or 3-2 or whatever. But relatively competitive, Minnesota does anything. We can certainly see CMC MVP, any other 49ers flex, and then 3 more Vikings. Certainly could happen. Maybe a little bit with Ayuk too. Ayuk takes all the receiving work, pair him with Purdy, and then 3 Vikings with him. Yeah, I could see that happening for sure. Keon says it is pronounced Keon. So, all right, good. Got you, Keon. No problem. Thank you for letting me know how to pronounce it. All right, 6:30. Let's get final questions in. The daily plug is up, OccupyFantasy.com. The link is in the description below. Rankings for every player on the slate for different contest types. Overall slate notes. Lineup construction tips for specific sites. So we have different questions in the chat, which we appreciate. How do I build lineups for this contest? Our daily plug at Occupy Fantasy goes into detail for different contest types for both FanDuel and DraftKings. So if you have those questions for every slate, make sure you check that out. And our model is updated with projected ownership. Inactives are coming in about 15 minutes or so. We're not expecting anything, but if there are surprises, our model will update accordingly. Builder is ready to go. Build up to 300 lineups using our optimal lineup criteria. All right, so I talked on it at the very top. The question here, do you think CMC gets a full workload due to his injury? Would I give him a full workload? No. Do I think Shanahan will give him a full workload? Probably until the game's out of hand. So, yeah, I think it's more likely than not. So, but just his overall price, his injury itself, the potential to reduce his workload, I think it's worth being underweight on the field. And you can just close your laptop and go to bed once he has 2 touchdowns in the first half. Win-win. All right, legit question here. Thoughts on Willie Snead? Yeah, didn't think I'd be talking about Willie Snead in 2023, but Willie Snead. So hold on, let me check here. Is he on the active roster? Is the first question. Let's go to, you know what? Let's go to our lads. This is a trusted roster resource. Let's reload it here. Let's go to San Francisco. This is great for checking out who's active, who's on the active roster, who's not. So Willie Snead is not on the active roster, so do not play Willie Snead. If we scroll down, Willie Snead is on their practice squad, so he's not going to play tonight. They instead elevated Chris Conley. Please get out of here with this dentist ad, this toothpaste ad. Okay. So Chris Conley was elevated. So if you're looking for a $200 min price veteran wide receiver, Conley's your guy, not Willie Snead. So thank you for bringing that up. Anthony says, I feel disgusting fading Ayuk in the 500K DraftKings tournament. Well, if they play more zone, apparently, he might not do well. So whatever, man. He's going to be popular. You got to take some stands somewhere. I don't hate it, man. I mean, I've made worse stands seemingly every slate. So you won't be alone if he goes off. Let's see. Yeah, this is some more Vikings majority lineups questions. Yeah, and so this is a good point. Nigel says Qualkais has Ray under 1.5 receptions. Qualkais is the guy who gifted all the subs earlier. He posted in the bets channel in our Discord server that he likes Ray unders. I'd be interested in hearing the rationale there as well. Now, as I said at the top of the show, Ray is going to play likely 25 to 45% of the snaps. Likely get some design touches. So curious to see what Qualkais says. Or Qualkais is just rolling in dough and just making bets regardless of the outcome. So, all right, guys, that'll do it for this video. Once again, if you're not subscribed, make sure you are here on YouTube for the NFL content. But if you're planning on playing NBA, it is so important to be updated in the news, and our team is going to do a great job of that every single day. Couldn't be me, but our team will do it every single day before live Q&A here on YouTube, as well as a different and separate live Q&A in our Discord server afterwards. So 2 live Q&As every single day for NBA. Those guys are psychos. So if you're playing NBA, make sure you're subscribed here in our Discord and a member of OccupyFantasy.com where you can access our Occupy model for NBA that literally updates every single minute and has projected ownership. So that'll do it. Thank you for listening. Good luck as always. One final question. Samuel says, you always say any players under 7,500 on FanDuel. Not likely. Is that the same as 2,500 on DK? A lot different, right? Because a $200 player can catch 1 or 2 passes and be optimal on DraftKings, even in low-risk contests. Because of the scoring system, the salary multiplier, the salary scale, you figure the highest price player on DraftKings, $12K versus $200, and on FanDuel it's $16,000 versus $5,000, only 3 times as much, is a big difference. So you really can't compare the two sites when it comes to thinking about salary tiers and who we can and can't play in low-risk contests. Actual final question. JP says, is playing no CMC and Ayuk getting too cute? That's a good question. Like, what would happen? What would have to happen there? Random touchdown. A Kittle game? I guess you would probably have to play Kittle or Vikings blow them out somehow. CMC limited, Ayuk shut down, Juwan Jennings, Ray, Kittle, Purdy, some sneaks. I can see it. Just make sure you tell the right story around it if you don't play either of those guys in a lineup. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and good luck in tonight's 49ers and Vikings showdown slate.